Hi class, how are you? Mr. K here. We're going to be going over the third workshop today, which has the essential question, how did the colonists get what they wanted? In the last workshop, we talked about what the American colonists wanted, and they basically wanted their civic values to be employed in their government society. How are they going to get what they want? That's what we're going to talk about here. In the first documents 1A, 1B, basically the main idea we were trying to get you guys to look at is a way that the American colonists are going to respond to things they disagree with about British policy. So you saw and read about the Tea Act and how the British basically made a monopoly over the tea trade in the American colonies and made them pay these outrageous prices for tea. Many colonists disagreed with this, and they're going to go and they're going to protest. And you saw that in the picture through the Boston Tea Party. They took and dumped millions of dollars worth of tea into the harbor, completely wasting it. It was a huge economic blow to Great Britain, to the British East India Company, and that's how they kind of voiced their displeasure at that time. As you took a look at the second one, if you couldn't tell, it was the Declaration of Independence. And you can really see the explicit connections between the Declaration of Independence and those civic values. You know, the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It explicitly says a civic value right there. And the purpose of that document was the fact that that's another way to protest, to get your opinion out there, to express your discontent. So as you can see through the first two documents, there was protests, both kind of aggressive and non-aggressive. There were more non-aggressive protests where they rallied around speeches and they publicly gathered in assembly halls and things to that nature. But there's also writing down your ideas, and it wasn't just a Declaration of Independence, but Thomas Paine's Common Sense, for example, was another example of and that's an English workshop that you guys did a couple days ago, of how you can take your ideas, write them down, and send these out. You know, especially with the printing press making literature more available, you can distribute this to the masses and get your word out there. In addition, the Declaration of Independence, as you can imagine, is not going to be too highly viewed upon by the British government. And as a result, there's a lot of tension between the British and the Americans at this time because of the Declaration of Independence and because of a lot of these protests. And eventually violence is going to erupt out at the Battle of Lexington and Concord. And the purpose of this document is to show that when all else fails, the Americans needed to resort to violence to get what they wanted. They tried protesting, both violent and nonviolent. They tried writing down their ideas in the Declaration of Independence and giving it to the king. They've tried rallying the people around these different cries. At the end of the day, those weren't working. So what they needed to do was they needed to go to war. That was their last resort, and that's what they're going to utilize to fight for what they believe in. Document 4, as the Americans defeat the British in the Revolutionary War, they get the help from the French, and to a lot of, pretty much the whole world's surprise, they were able to defeat the #1 military power in the world at that time. A huge monumentous feat that the United States was able to do. And as a result of defeating Great Britain, they were able to become the free and independent nation of the United States. Documents 5A and 5B. A little not so much having to do with how the colonists got what they wanted, but almost kind of like an epilogue to the story of the Revolutionary War. So they've made this huge deal about not extending equality and liberty and justice and all these American civic values, how they were being prevented from being extended by the British imperialists, by the British government. And so they make this whole deal, they protest, they write down their ideas, they do the Declaration of Independence, those don't work, so they go to war with Great Britain. They amazingly defeat Great Britain. And then you would think, okay, so now they've won. They can now extend these civic values to everyone living in the colonies. Not true. Women, African Americans, other minorities are not extended the same freedoms. And you saw with those kind of excerpts that you studied in 5A and 5B, how women, African Americans, were not treated as citizens, as humans rather, especially African Americans, given the slave trade that was going on at the time. In addition, women had no voice, and Abigail Adams was basically calling out her husband, saying, we need to have a voice. We're just as important too. And it's going to take decades, hundreds of years rather, to start to begin to shift, to restore some of these civic values to all Americans, women and African Americans and other minorities. So those were basically the documents. In terms of possible answers to the question, you guys did a great job coming up with those in class, and we basically compiled a lot of those possible answers into a real answer to the question. Real answer, as you can see kind of on the screen, the colonists got what they wanted by protesting and expressing their discontent with British colonial policy. And when this didn't work, mind you, they turned to declaring independence from the British government in the forms of the Declaration of Independence and later the Revolutionary War. And they did this, once again, so they can incorporate their civic values. They believe so full-heartedly in their American civic values on how this is how a government should be run, that they were willing to fight a war over it. However, kind of a little caveat, these civic values were not extended to all colonists. Women, African Americans, as I previously stated, were not extended the same rights and civic values that the rest of the American colonists were. And that's something to keep in mind, especially as we go forward through some other projects that we're going to do later in the year. As for the kind of follow-up questions, number one, explaining how failed attempts to mitigate conflicts between the American colonists and the British led to the colonists to declare independence. Basically, if you don't put out a fire, the fire is going to spread. And that's exactly what happened. The British weren't able to keep the colonists from getting too angry, and eventually that anger spread to more and more people, and eventually got too big to the point where they declared war. They declared independence first, but then they declared war, and then the British were kicked out of the United States, and they lost their colonies, very valuable ones at that. The civic values of the United States were reinforced by the failed attempts to mitigate conflicts, because basically what I was trying to get at with this question is that these civic values were so dear and highly supported by the American colonists that they were strengthened in the fact that they wouldn't take no for an answer. You know, they tried to voice their opinions through pamphlets like Common Sense, and the British didn't listen. They tried to protest in the Boston Tea Party and other instances. The British didn't listen. They didn't just stop there. A lot of groups have just stopped there. They didn't think they could do any more. The American colonists believed so full-heartedly in their civic values and their civic ideals that they went to fight a war on this. And that in itself reinforces these civic values. Number three, how the main ideas of the Declaration of Independence and Revolutionary War reinforce them. Kind of easy. They were explicitly talked about in the Declaration of Independence, and they were the battle cries for George Washington and all the soldiers in the Continental Army. They were very apparent. And lastly, we kind of already went over this, but how the impact of the Revolutionary War on women and African Americans not reinforced the civic values. Basically, the fact that these civic values weren't extended to them. They were still treated as second-class citizens or not citizens at all, and that's something that needs to be kind of taken note of as we explore American history in this kind of thematic way. So nice job. Task 4 was just kind of the link to the bullet point, just because I wanted to make sure you guys are looking at the rubrics as we go through these great workshops that I've created. Making sure it's important to always look at the rubrics as we're kind of going through these projects. So nice job today. Well done. If you missed anything in this video, or you weren't in class and you had some more clarifying questions, just send me an email or come in after school. Let me know. Till next time.